What's the most physical pain you've ever been? Dental abscess. Holy IE fuck, eyes crossed. Kidney stone blocked my urinary tract and got stuck. Basically the sharpest pain I've ever felt in my lower back. And my bladder would just fill up and it would make me puke, and I just kept doing it until I got to the ER. Definitely wouldn't recommend lol. The first time my dad had a kidney stone, my mom drove him to the hospital. I was in the back seat, maybe 10 years old. My dad kept trying to open his door and presumably jump out of the car. My mom kept locking the door back as soon as he would unlock it. He kept saying, "Just let me fall out. It will knock me out so I won't be in pain anymore." My mom was doing like 70 miles per hour, so it would have definitely done more than just knock him out. I was laying on the bathroom floor before I told my wife to take me to the ER. I hung my head out the window and death seriously sounded better than the pain I was in lol. Appendicitis. Was sent back to work for 2 weeks when it was misdiagnosed as period pain. I was pretty ill when I finally got to hospital. I'm surprised I had to scroll this far. I had it when I was 13 and I remember just rocking back and forth in my bed sobbing. It was nighttime, so I didn't want to disturb my parents, but it finally got to the point I had to. My mom drove me to the ER and the doctor said, "Oh, it's just a bad stomach ache, here some antacid." I said no way. Took the medicine. And as they pulled the curtain back to let me go, I vomited all over the floor. They did a few more tests and then rushed me into surgery for an emergency appendectomy. Post-joint replacement wake up. Because of the anesthesia, they said they had to wait for me to be fully awake before giving me any painkillers, and fuck did it hurt a lot until the third round of Dilaudid. Shingles. As horrible as it looks, the rash itself doesn't hurt all that bad. The nerves underneath are inflamed, and will send out a 100% pain signal at the slightest touch. Even a light sheet brushing over it was enough to take my breath away and leave me writhing. And it lasts for weeks. Had internal bleeding for 3 days. Had to go to the bathroom like 20 times a day, just for a drop of blood to come out. Labor after they gave me pitocin, oxytocin. I had the easiest labor, but it was moving slowly, so they gave me pitocin. And then it just felt like death. It was basically one constant contraction after that point. I've had epididymitis, inflammation of the tube at the back of the testicle that stores and carries sperm. A constant pain that lasts for a couple weeks usually and feels like you got kicked in the balls. Also, not sure what it was, but I had a sore throat that felt like I'd just swallowed a baseball with razor blades in it that was sprinkled with salt and some lemon juice thrown on it for some extra kick. My throat still doesn't feel right, and it's been years since that happened. I was helping my dad to replace the windows at our house when I was in high school. I went to carry a rotten frame to the trash pile. The window glass slid through the frame and hit me in the shin, slicing a piece of my shin bone out. It hurt so bad that I went into shock, fell down, and vomited on myself. It was a 105-degree day in Texas, and I managed to burn myself on the asphalt I fell on. My dad didn't realize I'd been hurt for about 10 minutes and had to help me get up and get inside because of blood loss and being in shock. It was the worst. I kept the piece of bone that came off my shin. Edit. I've been informed there's etiquette to getting awards. Thanks for the awards. I didn't expect this post to get any traction at all. Got a tube stuck in my chest to fix my spontaneous pneumothorax. It was only for about 3 or 4 seconds that I was in agony, but the tube felt horrible, scraping my insides. A few years ago I randomly got pain circling my abdomen around my ribs. It had me screaming on the floor in tears while wrapping my arms around my middle. It came on so suddenly, and my brother, who was with me, had no idea what was happening. He rang 999 and they sent a paramedic. By the time the paramedic had arrived, maybe 15 to 20 minutes later, it had already started to subside. The paramedic couldn't figure it out, so I ended up going to the hospital. After multiple tests, no one could give me an answer to why I just suddenly had such agonizing pain. To this day it's the worst pain I've ever felt, and I don't even know what triggered it. Urinary tract infection. I was peeing blood and it burned so bad that it felt like sharp glass. It lasted for about a month. I recently went through 2 major surgeries back to back, including a C-section. After it was over, the hospital didn't give me any good pain medication because they're worried about addiction apparently. My spine was hurting terribly. My stomach. And my neck. I was pretty much only able to move my arms without pain and had to deal with that having only maximum strength ibuprofen. Recovery was painful. Toss up. I had my hand covered in 700-degree hot asphalt. It was horrible. Took 4 hours on the ER and 2 painkiller shots to make it through. They basically had to chisel it off in sections because they couldn't tell what was still living tissue and dead tissue. Also had my GF of the time poke me in the eye with her long fingernails. It went straight through the pupil, slicing it exactly in the center. It starting squirting liquid and good out. Went to the hospital 3 days later because my dad said it wasn't that bad. Excruciating. Going off a bouncy castle slide wrong and getting a friction burn that took off most of my kneecap. Wasn't the most painful, but it's a bit more memorable than what actually was. Brain aneurysm rupture easily. Probably my first gout attack. Now I'm used to the pain, but I didn't know what was going on at the time. The wind from the ceiling fan felt like I had 3rd-degree burns on my foot. Gout is my number 1 as well. I get mild cases often and deal with it, but I feel like it's misunderstood by many people how debilitating and painful it can be. The worst case I had was when the inflammation was up to my left knee and barely got my shoe off because of the pain and swelling. The pain is like when your foot starts coming to after falling asleep. That intense tingling, well, amplify that. It doesn't go away and gets worse if you touch it or step. Caffeine triggers mine, so I live with constant inflammation or lethargy. Thanks Dad lol. Toothache. I have given birth without pain meds 3 times, but I would rather do that every single night of my life than feel 1 second of tooth pain. Fuck that shit. The insertion of a radiologically inserted gastrostomy, RIG, tube into my stomach. I was told that it would be uncomfortable by the ward consultant and junior doctors, but that I would be fine. I was awake for the procedure but sedated and given a strong painkiller before it got underway, midazolam for the sedative, fentanyl for the painkiller. During the procedure I felt nothing. Being essentially stabbed by a medical professional in the stomach wasn't painful when these drugs were still in my system. But a few hours after my last dose of the medications and the pain was out of this world insane. It felt like the equivalent of being relentlessly punched by a bodybuilder continuously in the same spot, if you can imagine that. They administered morphine every hour or so on the first day, but it did little to reduce the pain and to make things worse, because I also had pneumonia at the time. Anytime I would cough, my abdominal muscles would contract and it would be unbearable, but I couldn't help it. It took probably a week for the pain to go away completely-ish, and that was with daily opiate administration in the hospital wars. TLDR, had a rig inserted in my stomach to help me have a nutritional source. Being told it would not be too painful a procedure. Ended up having a week of unbearable pain in my stomach, the incision site. I had a full bilious attack, gallstones and kidney stones, and one of the gallstones got lodged in the pipes to my pancreas, so I almost went into full pancreatic shock. Needless to say, it goddamn hurt that eye. A masculine 36 male was begging nurses left and right to help me as the meds keep wearing off and I was coughing up blood. This happened 3 times in the last 6 years. Stupid move, doing a belly flop on a trampoline. Did a human scorpion something fierce and felt every bone in my vertebrae pop, even up and through my shoulder blades. Took me about 10 minutes to catch my breath and move from the spot. Getting my IUD put in. I agree. It was worse than going through labor twice. Had a tooth drilled and pulled out piece by piece. One of the roots of the tooth that was being removed was stuck under the root of a healthy tooth. The dentist stopped and told me to go to an emergency surgeon, where I waited in the lobby for an hour and a half for him to finish up with someone else. The numbing from the previous dentist was long gone and I was stuck waiting with a drilled hole in my mouth and exposed root waiting. I can't even think about that memory too long before I get sick to my stomach. I once pinched a nerve in my lower back moving a 3-pound chair 6 inches. You want to talk about that kind of pain that leaves you a crippled mess on the floor? And this is coming from a dude who's been hit by a car while riding a bicycle. Granted, I don't remember much of that, but still, I have a herniated disc and it's only ever been acutely aggravated doing penny ante shit like that. Build a shed or a deck with huge ass timbers, shovel tons of mulch and gravel, lift up and pull a trailer around by hand. No problem. Install a child car seat, bend over to pick up a Christmas ornament, do a couple sit-ups. Off to the hospital with you. I had pectus excavatum. In a nutshell, my sternum did not grow out with the rest of my ribcage, and my chest appeared to cave in. This is a birth condition. When I was 15, I had a NUS procedure to correct it. I had a metal rod placed and my sternum was cranked into place. The rod was fixed to allow the sternum to grow into the proper position. I grossly simplified these 2 things, but it's just for context. Specifics aren't relevant. Was in the hospital for a week. My chest was inflamed as hell. Eating was sometimes difficult but not unbearable, and moving around was a bit uncomfortable. Nothing really painful happened at the hospital, oddly enough. It was the day I went home. I had not produced a BM since the procedure, 1 week plus. The doctors and my parents tried everything from a suppository to a full-blown enema and nothing. I get home and my dad starts pumping me full of prune juice. That evening, we are eating dinner, and my dad keeps telling me to drink more prune juice. I tell him that I'm full and not feeling all that good. Dad pushes me to keep drinking more. I relent and keep drinking, and then it hits. I beeline to my bathroom to try and puke, but my chest is still inflamed and my body simply could not throw it up. Whatever it was that was coming up was fighting against a swollen chest cavity, and it felt like I was being ripped open from the stomach up. At the same time, I couldn't breathe. I was basically drowning in my own vomit. I genuinely felt like I was going to die and I was powerless to stop it. After what seemed like minutes, I finally vomited it out. I don't even know what it was, and I didn't care. I was laid out on my bathroom floor wailing in pain to the point that it drove my siblings out of the house. After it was all over, my dad helps me off the floor, hugs me, and says, "I'm so sorry, son." It's one of only 2 times in my life that I saw my father cry. The other was when his mother died, and in an instance that can only be described as dot. Because of course, the BM occurs a few hours later. I've suffered from hydrocephalus a few times in the past, large amounts of fluid and pressure building up against the brain. Hurts like a motherfucker. I have 2 shunts in my brain to help with it, but I have to watch in case one malfunctions. I've had a few revisions over the years, but the last times I had it bad was when I was 12. Back when I was first in the hospital for brain surgery and then one a few weeks later. The pain is like no other. The memory of it is seared into my brain. I remember thinking I was going to die, and even wishing for death due to how I was suffering. I'm highly tolerant of anesthesia, numbing shots, and that diagnosis did not reach my urologist when I got a vasectomy. I felt the whole thing. Everything. All of it. The nurse took me aside afterwards and asked me how I was doing, and she said, "I've done 5 of these, and I've never seen a patient feel that much of the procedure." It's 2010. Watching England in the World Cup. The tournament full of those loud and obnoxious horns. I blew a vuvuzela loudly outside my brother's room at home, and he slams his door over my foot by accident, driving my toenail vertical, leaving me running around the house screaming in pain, and my toe reduced to cat flap. I was in between apartments at the time, so I was back at Ma and Pa's for a bit. My mother worked at a daycare, and she ended up bringing home hand, foot and mouth disease. We both ended up with severe cases. It started as just a sore throat, which became a crazy delirium-inducing fever, and then came hell. Everything hurt. I could barely move. I was covered in sores, some of which were on the bottoms of my feet, so walking was a painful endeavor. My skin would flake off in these big patches. All my fingernails and toenails died, and weeks later I had to trim the old nails back as I could see the new nails growing in. Sleeping was a 3 to 4 hour a night thing because comfort was impossible. Every little movement would send burning pain through my body. All told, it probably took about 6 weeks for my body to fully reset itself. I've been to jail 3 times. I would go a 4th if the choice was between that and HFM again. Cluster headaches. There's a reason its nickname is suicide headache, and women who have given birth have said they'd rather give birth than go through another cluster. FR. Google it. It's one of, if not the most, painful conditions known to man. Absolutely horrific. This is also coming from someone who suffered a ruptured appendix, and that's like a 3/10 compared to this.